Hey guys, welcome to the Great Break podcast. I am Rena Wells. I am a high priestess, healer, mystic. I have 30 years of subconscious work working on ancestral wounding and trauma bonding and psychological disorders. And I've had 30 years of going deep into my subconscious healing. And I'm here to help bring awareness to the collective, to people out there who are wanting to merge the old way of living and coming into a new way of living, and people who are having a really big shift in consciousness right now, who are having a great break awakening. This is what the podcast is about. And our very first show, which I am super excited about, I had to bring my cousin because, she is amazing. She is Dr. Victoria Doobay, who has a doctorate in psychology. She's working with North Branch Community Yoga, and she's here to kind of give us details about the work that she's been doing with the youth around decolonization, awakening consciousness, ancestral wounding, and how that has psychologically imposed on humanity as a collective. So I'm super excited to introduce Victoria, bring her onto the show, and have some really great discussion today. Welcome, Victoria.
Thank you so much, Rena. I'm so happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
Oh, so welcome. So welcome. So I'm really excited about today and this conversation because you and I talk a lot about our own ancestral wounding and traumas that I've gone through and things like that. So I'm really excited to hear your take in the work that you're doing and what you've recognized in your own awakening. And maybe we can start and maybe fill everybody in about what you do right now, what got you into your field, and where you see that shifting in the near future. Go
Yeah,
ahead. Yeah.
absolutely. So for me, I think working with people in a healing capacity and psychology is something that came to me at a really young age. So in a strange kind of way, I don't even remember when I decided I wanted to be a psychologist. It just felt like an intuitive knowing.
Right.
And maybe my first understanding of what intuition is. I just knew it was going to happen. And
Mhm.
so moving through the matrix in grad school and making that happen was what I did. And right now, I feel like, especially since COVID and the pandemic, I've taken a really deep dive into analyzing and feeling through what's going on.
Right.
So right now, I do work at a community mental health agency through a college in Chicago. And
Mhm.
that's fascinating because it's shown me so much how different things have changed over time working with kids and teenagers and families and also supervising
Right.
students. So I'm thinking a lot about, well, how do we want to, as a faculty right now, mentor these upcoming students and how can we connect with them? So that's been a piece of it. And then
Mhm.
recently, I also decided to pursue yoga as a way of connecting deeper with our ancestry line.
Yes.
Since our
Yeah.
ancestors are indentured laborers, and so I've
Mhm.
always thought of myself from Guyana, which we
Mhm.
are to some degree, but it always stopped there for me in a way. The
Right.
idea that we are probably from India felt so far away. Uh,
Mhm.
and that really, it was something that I just kind of accepted. And I feel like through the yoga training, it's actually something that I've allowed myself to grieve more and try to
Mm.
reconnect with,
Mhm.
and also grieve that it might not be me being raised in India with a certain kind of culture, but also celebrating maybe the integration of the cultures that I do have. So a bit of that process. And yeah, and I think I've just been thinking a lot about accessibility, both for the community mental health agency and my yoga jobs, and thinking a lot about what wellness means in general and
Right.
how we throw a lot of buzzwords around and what is really the meaning. I think our society is so good at throwing buzzwords around without really
Yes.
understanding or picking apart the meaning.
Yeah, that's how I did so great in the government for so many years was you just know the right terminology and you can
Right?
basically sell anything, right, in the matrix, right? Well, I think that's fascinating that you really brought up like the Hindu stuff and that's our ancestry line. And I've also struggled with that as well. And I love what you're doing with the work that you're doing. And you said that you always intuitively knew that
Mhm.
you were going to get into this line of work. So I love when we have our discussions, Victoria, because you have such a great rationale and the education behind what's going on in the world. But yet there is such a deep intuitive piece and a deep wisdom that comes from your knowing, like I love that about you. And so how do you merge those two? Because I know myself, when I worked in government, so logically minded, I had a professor when I was doing my business, a business course. We did some kind of psychological testing. I think it was the ENTJs or the Myers-Briggs or something like that. And he looked at my results and he said, how can you be so logical yet so creative or so intuitive? How do you merge those two worlds? So how do you do that in your work? How do you do that with all the mental rationale and with what you know so deep in your soul?
Yeah, I think that's an excellent question and one that I often struggle with. I think, again, our particular society, North American or Western, so to call it, society, emphasizes the cerebral so much. And
Hmm.
it's far too easy for myself to get stuck there. And
Yeah.
I'll overthink something, or I'll approach everything from like a book perspective or an academic perspective.
Hmm.
And we're trained in grad school often to operate from that approach, because I
Right.
think psychology tries so hard to be sort of some kind of objective science. And I've
Hmm.
always thought to myself, it can't be like that because people are all different. We're all
Right.
dynamic. And there might be some universals or some truths that we all hold. We feel grief, we feel love, we feel fear.
Hmm.
But
Hmm.
how we approach or work with that can look drastically different from one person to the next. So I think it's for me, reconciling the cerebral and the intuitive has always been a struggle. And
Hmm.
it's sometimes I feel like I'm better at it than others. And something that's really helped is over the quarantine, we were all in person before that. There was sort of like
Yeah.
a pre-pandemic, and I was working these long hours. And after adopting teletherapy and some kind of hybrid model and being at home for a year plus, it forced me in a sense to actually discover the way I naturally move, which is a lot
Yeah.
slower than
Right.
I thought that I moved or I've been taught to move. And
Yes.
I think that's the piece of it that I have been trying, now that I have that knowing, when I'm softer or moving slower is when I can access my
Hmm.
intuition better. And because I know that now, I've been trying to make more space for it. So maybe having quieter nights, or doing more yoga. Yoga really helps me connect spiritually.
Right.
And community's been helping me connect spiritually. So am I spending my time with people I love or talking to people I love? Like when we talk,
I know.
um, and I think that's how I work to balance it. I can sense a lot more now when it's out of balance. And now I have more tools to know what to do. So I'm like,
Hmm.
well, maybe I need to move this energy around. I'll go for a walk, or I'll do yoga, or I'll just sit in the sunroom and feel the sun on me. It can be as simple as that sometimes, to connect me back. And I've been working really hard at balancing that, but it's every day it's a different.
Is it really it really is. And I know, like, we operate a little bit different in that sense where we've had a big age difference between us as well, right? So the first part, when you were still little, me diving into all that intuitive stuff and all, I mean, it was kind of thrown in my face. I had to work at it in a different way. So how is it now that you are noticing in that relaxing space, right? Because we
Mhm.
do live in a world that has been colonized. That's pretty much what's happened. It's taken away from this space that you're talking about of meditation, because that does come from Eastern philosophies, right? Yoga, for instance, even plant medicines are from, all over different places of the world. So I feel like Canada, North America, we suffer a lot because even if you look at Europe,
Mhm.
there's still so much other there's something deeper over there still, it's older. There's still something more tangible and something more mystical. You have folklore and things like that in medieval times, or the elves and the fairies and the Celtic type of tradition. So we in Canada and the US, we have what is going on here when we are trying to find this mystical or something deeper or something that, I know you're saying you're trying to balance that and figure that out in your day and whatnot. But now that you're diving more deeply into that world and ancient healing, different things and ancient healing and whatnot, how are you seeing the suffering now with people who are struggling with mental health, and knowing that there's maybe a plant or a ceremony or something more, Chinese medicine or other kinds of healing? How do you bridge that when in your heart with helping people in the work that you're doing, when it's so it's so different over here?
Yeah,
You know?
absolutely. I think I've got several answers for that, so
Yeah,
please
go for
bear with
it.
me.
Yeah, I
Uh,
love it. Go for it.
I think often of just sort of the root cause of suffering in the system, and
Hmm.
I think that's where I'd love to start with this. Is you
Hmm.
mentioned colonization, and it
Yeah.
has me kind of thinking, well, Europeans came over here and
Right.
took land and killed people and harmed
Hmm.
people and took what wasn't theirs and imposed
Hmm.
their own culture, values, systems. And
Right.
I think if we start in that place, like we're already starting on a playing field that is completely unequal and harmful for
Mm.
anyone who really comes to this country or to
Hmm.
Canada.
Yeah.
And it has me kind of thinking about the root cause of suffering from there, that if you go somewhere and you steal something,
Hmm.
then there's already so much darkness there. And if you're
Right.
building from this place of taking from someone else,
Yeah.
without acknowledgement or gratitude or paying homage to it, then
Hmm.
that's the root of the problem. And I
Yeah, it is.
almost see the people that I work with, and even in myself, or my colleagues, my friends, our family, I feel that that's one of the biggest root causes of suffering. Our family got taken over to Guyana as indentured laborers and didn't
Yeah.
have choice in that, and
Right.
you're forced to sort of adapt to whatever circumstances you're in.
Hmm.
And that's where maybe resilience is born, or integration of different perspectives, but
Hmm.
it's coming from a place of harm. And I
Yes.
think that's where a lot of the suffering comes from. And so when I think about bridging that gap between the Western approaches and
Hmm.
some of other types of approaches, it has me thinking a lot about this idea of a third space. So oftentimes in Western mental health, we see, or we're taught to see in grad school, these evidence-based practices as the
Ah,
perspective, like CBT
right.
is the best, or
Right.
DBT is the best. And a lot of these therapies that we use are derived from a lot of Eastern tradition. So
Right.
mindfulness is a large component, for
Yeah.
example, of a lot of the different types of evidence-based therapies. But I think when you start off with stealing something, it becomes easy to continue to appropriate. Um,
Mm.
and I'm not saying that everyone who has developed therapies has done that, because there are some very responsible and
Right.
ethical theory developers who will acknowledge and discuss where their therapies come from. And so it's absolutely not everyone, but I think in our
Hmm.
culture, we're taught so much to believe that these are the ways that you can work with people. And it's so tough, because then you internalize, yes, this is the way, when really it's a way, it's not the way.
Hmm.
There are many other ways. And yes, it has
Right.
utility and can be helpful for some, but it's not necessarily helpful for everyone.
Right.
So I think thinking about it in that way has helped me to expand my understanding of what wellness or mental health is. And it goes
Hmm.
beyond mental for me. I think about it more as um, as body, mind, and soul. So it's not even
Yes.
necessarily mental health. It's just like, it's just health in general.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and so, yeah, I think I've been trying to approach working with my clients more from that place,
Mm,
and trying to be sort of like maybe a guide or a holding space, not necessarily giving different kinds of worksheets, but
right.
encouraging them maybe to seek out other types of therapies or wellnesses
Alternative.
that would be
Yeah.
good for them, like
Right.
acupuncture.
Right.
Um, yeah, or nutrition, healthy
Yeah.
eating is a huge piece of it.
Yes, it is. It is. Because we even see that in our world today. Like the way that we eat is not even
Right.
aligned to nature, or even, how we grew up Guyanese, like we don't go to McDonald's or we don't do those types of things. Um,
Absolutely.
yeah. And so you're bringing up more about like our ancestry and our ancestry line and the indentureship. And that kind of caught my attention too when you were talking about how that has changed our ancestry line a lot. And I understand when you're saying about, our families have been in Guyana for what, 300 years or something, or 200 years or something like that. And I understand my roots never felt linked to the Caribbean. I know, like, I love Guyana and I love going down there and I love the rainforest and all of that. But like you as well, I wanted to know more about where we came from. And there's so much of this that has been lost, even when I've gone down and I've drank ayahuasca or have tried different methods of healing that are outside of, mental health or what we know in our society. Um, just my experiences alone when I was doing therapy, and working through the indentureship of our family and the suffering of our family, the traumas of our family, and trying to find something rooted in myself. I found it very difficult. Now this is going years back. I know it's changed and you're on the brink of changing things and doing that. But back in, and I don't know, there might be somebody listening to this that's still having these issues where, seeking and knowing my intuition and the visions and having to go speak to a therapist or speak to people about, things that come through our lineage, because we have a very gifted psychic family lineage. I know there's lots of other indigenous and people BIPOC that have these gifts, right? And I'm not saying that white people don't, Caucasians don't. I know they do way back. There were shamans in their lineage as well. But something around this mysticism has gotten lost. And I have found it very difficult speaking to doctors or psychologists or counselors about my visions because they seem more real than this reality. And so how is it, like, if somebody is listening to this and they're having dreams and messages from spirit, or they're having mystical out of body experiences, where, if somebody came to you with that, I know you're more open to it, but let's take an example that somebody's a complete opposite of you. How is it that somebody out there can seek something more, or somebody in the mental health field that has, like, are there programs? Is there outreach? Is there something new that's happening? Is there a way that these people who have outer different kinds of it, who are having an awakening process, right? Finding the right help in the world that we currently live in.
Right. I mean, that's an excellent question. And I don't think that there's an easy answer to that, because I think right now things are in development. There's
Right.
absolutely therapists and mental health clinicians or psychologists that would be open to it. And it comes down to finding the right fit for you as well, which is
Hmm.
really tough, because something I struggle often with is I feel like I'm supporting people in systems that are harmful to them and harmful to
Yeah.
me. And
Right.
I struggle with that existential sort of dread around that, about the meaningful
Uh-huh.
aspects of doing this kind of work.
Yeah.
Um, on a bad day. And I think it's hard because it comes down to connection to me, for
Mm,
me, in a sense that if you feel connected to someone, maybe you would be able to feel enough trust or know you're in a safe space that you can bring that up. but finding that connection can be tough in our particular mental health field. So if someone came to me, 100% I'm open to that. I know several other students that I've trained or other colleagues that I've worked with. I happen to be very fortunate to work with colleagues who are interested in expanding. And I know they all would more or less be open to it. And I think it's just tough though, because there's no set place on like where to look for that. We don't have a database that sort of includes information like that. It includes a lot of the buzzwords, like things like diversity or DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion. And, you know, everyone's trying to put that now because they want to appear a certain way. And that is also worrisome. So I don't know that I have great advice necessarily for someone who's seeking out a database or a resource that would be able to provide a list of mental health practitioners. And that is absolutely, I think, an area of need. And there's sort of like, because it's sort of on the brink of developing, there's absolutely people that I know or that maybe I follow on social media that are doing that work and are more interested in it. And I think that it might be about compiling something that could be, you know, like a helpful thing to do, that if you live in this area, contact these people or reach out to them and they can help you find someone that might be a good fit for you. And that might be something that needs to develop a bit more, because I think right now it's very hard for people who typically don't have access to mental health care to find people that would work well with them. You know, even just like finding a therapist of the same race as you, or finding a therapist who understands socioeconomic concerns and understands that, you might not have the transportation to get you to therapy. So maybe like work on something else and not just about changing the way you think about a situation. And so I think it's been historically difficult, and I'd be more than happy for anyone listening to this to have them reach out, and I can try to put them in touch or provide some level of connection.
Yeah, that would be amazing, because I know you're great at that whole aspect of looking at things outside of the box, whereas I know other people may not be. And the whole thing is like, we need trailblazers like you know, to really come out and start talking about, you know, what has happened to us as humanity, how we've lost a lot of our mysticism. And I think one of the concerns too, that as you were talking, what came up was this whole woke culture, right? As you know, we don't know where we're going with everything. There's nothing right now. People are having mystical experiences to find a therapist that's currently in the matrix. But then we have this whole aspect of this woke culture, you know, like, how do you feel about that? Let's talk a little bit, because I don't know how I feel about it, but I mean, there's like good points in it. Like, there's things that I can, you know, relate to, but something always feels a little off with me in regards to psychology, the mental health, like all of that, and then the woke aspect.
Absolutely. I think I have a lot of opinions about this, and I mean, they're constantly sort of developing, and I have, you know, like a partner and friends that I absolutely talk to about this a lot. And I think one of the major issues is, I think this kind of culture exists on a spectrum. Like, there are people who actively hold values of trying to expand and grow and reflect and unlearn things that they've been conditioned to know, and rebuild something that would be better for everyone. So there are absolutely people that are doing that. And then I think that on like the extreme level of the spectrum of woke culture, you have a lot of people that are doing the exact same thing that they're complaining about, of like the opposite side. You know what I mean? In a sense of polarizing or policing, in a sense, policing what people are saying all the time. Kind of being the first one to jump down someone's throat, but not actively really doing anything else apart from that. And I think that's sort of the issue I've been having is, you know, people can make a social media post or call someone out in a coffee shop, But what else are you doing in your everyday actions and in your decisions? How are you living? Who are your friends? Where are you learning? Where are you growing? Where are you breaking things down within yourself? And I think, you know, there are a lot of people that are doing that work, and there are a lot of people that are doing more of the surface level work. And I think that is incredibly harmful. And I think it sort of breeds this binary thinking that we should absolutely be trying to move away from, and doesn't allow for nuances that, again, humans are dynamic. And yes, sometimes someone's going to say something that's not correct. And how do we actually approach those conversations in a way where expansion could possibly happen?
Right. And for someone listening too, how would you describe woke? Maybe you give a definition of what you think woke. I'll tell you what mine is in a bit, but like what woke culture is, how that looks in the social matrix, right? And I mean, what do you think it really is on the whole? Because I mean, I have two different very opinions on it. Like woke, like I consider myself woke, but then you know, and aware and trying to make a difference in the world. But then there's like a whole other level of it too that I can see that people are also using, like you said, those labels and things like that to just categorize and discriminate or judge others.
Yeah.
So this is the issue that I have. How do you see woke culture?
Yeah, I agree. I think that's why I like to think about it sort of on a spectrum, with like the extremes on each side, and then people that are maybe doing a little bit more of what we want to call, or what woke wanted to be, in a sense. You know, like actually doing that internal work, or doing that work in the systems in which we participate in. And nobody's perfect at it. And I think that the problem with the extreme end of woke culture is that it demands some level of perfection, that you need to be operating on like knowing everything all the time, though things are constantly changing. The language we use is changing all the time. The way we think about things is changing all the time. And I feel like the danger of extreme, I guess I'll call it extreme woke culture to like illustrate the spectrum. I think the dangers of extreme woke culture is that it doesn't allow for any kind of deviance from our idea of what perfection is. So it's a lot of holding people to certain standards, like you can't say this, you can't do this, without actually expanding, you know, like this is a better way maybe to put it, or I wonder why that you said it that way. You know, it doesn't leave room for dialogue. It only leaves room for the things that you were saying, like judgment. I forget the other words you used, but judgment kind of stood out to me.
It's almost like spiritual bypassing is kind of how I see it, right? And we do that in the new age community, in the spiritual community. Positive thinking, trying to fix ourselves, trying to not feel something, whereas you and I know, us going into our ancestral wounding has been all about feeling, you know, has been all about digging really deep and questioning why we do the things we do in relationships, love. You and I talk about that a lot, and our work and everything else. So based on, let's go into your awakening process a little bit. Based on your awakening process, just off the top of your head, you know, your latest most epiphany, or something that has shifted inside of you consciously, has that aided you at all in the psychological work that you're doing, or has it at all? First of all, talk to me about your newest epiphany or newest awakening that you've had. How has that changed how you see your work as a psychologist, as a therapist, and how has it like, how has that changed that? Have you questioned it yourself more? Is basically what I'm saying, based on your newest expansion.
Absolutely.
Talk to me about that.
There's so many layers. I guess one of my newest expansions is there are a few, because I've got an internal one of moving slower, and that's been a huge one since I went on my trip to Mexico a few weeks ago. I feel like I got, after the pandemic, one of my worries was that, oh, I learned that I do move slower. And then having to sort of pick up the pace again, I was trying so hard to cling to moving
Ah,
slower and that integration piece. And then I got locked in again. And I knew
right.
I was locked in before the Mexico trip. And after the trip, I knew that I had broken free a little bit from it. And so
Mhm.
coming back home, I've been trying to move at that pace more and more. And I think it's been helpful. So that might look like me not scheduling as many things per day, let's say,
Right.
or answering every single email, or,
Mhm.
being like, I have this presentation I need to make. Well, I have time tomorrow. Like, I'll do it tomorrow and not stress myself out today. And
Right.
it looks like more of a tiered process to doing things rather than feeling like you have to do everything at one time. And
One
it has
time. Yeah.
me thinking a lot. And these are not necessarily new thoughts, they're just thoughts that have recircled back around for this
Mm.
particular time.
It
um,
always happens that way. It just comes
right?
right back around all the time. Yeah.
Exactly. And like, I think this is my hot thought right now, is thinking again about what productivity is in our society. And
Oh, that's a
I've
huge one.
Oh my gosh. And yeah, that one was out for a minute. And then I was thinking more about expanding mental health, but I'm back to productivity right now. And I think a thing that comes up for me often, and the person I probably talk to about this the most is my partner, because we both got really sad when we got back from Mexico on different days, which was helpful so we could support each other. But I think coming back to a place that felt so heavy, with
Mm.
like all
Mhm.
the terrible legislation that passed
Yep.
while we were in Mexico with Roe v. Wade, and coming
Mhm.
back, and like, guns having more rights
Mhm.
than people or women's,
Right.
yeah, people who identify as
Yep.
women's bodies. It's just like,
Yep.
oh my gosh. Um, and I think for me, it had me really thinking about what productivity is. It's like, we go to work, or we've been taught that we get up, we go to work, you make money, you retire, and
Right.
then you can live your life. And there's so
Right.
many people that I've seen that when they retire, they have lost complete access to themselves. They don't know themselves apart from their professional
Exactly.
identity.
Yeah.
And it has me, it makes me so sad. And I think on
Mhm.
times where like I'm really busy at work, or my partner's really busy at work, we don't see each other. And it breeds so much disconnection and a lot of
Mhm.
grief and sadness. And luckily, we communicate very well. So I think we're able to work through it. And I'm grateful for that. But it has me thinking about how our North American society has been set
I
up
know.
to trap people in this. And then
Yeah.
I have a lot of privilege in this system still. So I'm like, I'm floundering. Like, imagine someone who is living
Yeah.
paycheck to paycheck, or doesn't
Yeah.
know where their next paycheck is,
Exactly.
or someone who has like a lot of kids and doesn't know where their
Right.
next paycheck is. And
Right.
typically it's, there are certain intersections of identities in this North
Right.
American society where it just makes things so much harder for like, a Black woman living in the South Side of Chicago
Exactly.
compared to me. And it has me thinking, if I'm struggling, and I'm thinking about what productivity means, how is this other person doing in this? And it
Right.
reflects back to me, and how can I actually support my clients? And I
Mhm.
work with a lot of clients who are underinsured or on Medicaid. And so a lot of these
Yeah.
barriers do exist for them. And it has me wondering, well, what is actually helpful for you right now? Maybe you and I
Exactly.
sitting down and filling out your disability paperwork is more helpful than me teaching you this strategy to like change the way you're thinking?
And I think that's the whole part of that colonization is that separatist mindset, divide and conquer, right? That is what we have been conditioned into, right? And even with family and structure, and it's all about this separateness. So, like you're saying, a single Black woman, with children and not being able to get the help that she needs. And I understand too, as a single mom, but I mean, I'm still privileged as well, like, and compared to other people as well. Um, how do you, you know, dig deeper into finding yourself. That's the most difficult part, when all you are doing is surviving. All you are doing is living in a separatist type of consciousness, right? You constantly come from lack. And that takes like a bigger shift, you know, for somebody like, a single Black mother than somebody like us to dig deep and to find herself, to
Right.
come on out on the other side. And yeah, I
There's no
think let's
space for that,
there's
and
no space for
yeah,
that.
if you're in survival mode, like you're saying, then how can there be space for this hypothetical person we're talking about to find
Right,
time for herself and to
right,
do that inner work?
right.
And it's just, yeah, this is where
Yeah.
we're at.
Yeah. And we tell these people in society, well, it's just hard work. It's just hard work. And
Mhm.
it's not just hard work. It's not just
Absolutely.
a mindset. We're dealing with, ancestral traumas. There are things in how we were raised. There's so many things that have been suppressed at that point, that just doing hard work or even just getting up in the morning is
Mhm.
difficult to, when your soul is tired, right? Because you've been carrying heavier energies than what other people are carrying, based on what you've had to
Mhm.
deal with, based on your lineage and whatnot. So we're
Absolutely.
gonna take our first break. We're gonna take a break, because we're already 36 minutes in. I can't believe that. Like, the talks with you are amazing, I love them. But we're gonna take a quick break, and then we're gonna get into more about how you want to see things changing in the mental health, or even overall wellness for youth. I want to talk about the children, because maybe we'll talk about that in the next half bit, because I don't know, with these kids, man, and with my kids alone too. There's a change that's happened with
Mhm.
COVID and everything else. It's like the separation consciousness is just stronger, you
Right.
know?
Right.
So, yeah. So let's take our first break, and we'll be right back, guys. This is Victoria, Dr. Victoria Doobay on the Great Break podcast, and we're talking about all kinds of different great things. The podcast you don't want to hear. We'll be right back, guys. Stay tuned.
Hey guys, this is Victoria's email. I'm throwing it up here so you can contact her. I highly recommend her, not just because she is family, but she has been one of the brightest lights in my life. She has never judged me for my own shadow work and things that I've had to personally work through, and she brings such a beautiful conscious awareness to the mental health industry. Email her, especially maybe follow up with her in her yoga programs in the Chicago area. Take a look at her Instagram. I believe this rising star is here to make changes in our world and in the system, and to merge both worlds. We need people in all areas, and I highly recommend her, again, not just because she's family, but because I have witnessed change in my own life, because she's able to hold a very deep, solid container for your growth and for anything that you're going through. So check her out again. Her email is there, and her Instagram is down below. And obviously, there is me. I am a high priestess and a healer, like you guys know. And if you don't know what that is, I come from a very deep ancestral trauma bonding type of healing that I had to do. And I went through some of the darkest things and have healed some of the most complex disorders that many people face from a different way. Not from the psychological way, but from my soul, from my inner deep knowing. So this is why Victoria and I have such a beautiful bond, because we're coming at the same topic from two different extremes and two different sides to say. So take a look at my website. It's there. If you want to work with me, I'm able to feel energy out in a different way, and to pull up your Akashic, why you're here on the planet, and to give you a different perspective in how to work through your blocks. Again, if you want to work with me, that my website is there, and all the info is down below. Let's get back to it, guys. Let's get back to the podcast.
Welcome back, guys. I am Rena Wells of the Great Break podcast, the podcast you don't want to hear. I am a healer, a mystic, and a high priestess. 30 years of diving deep and healing a lot of ancestral wounds. And today we are back here with Victoria, Dr. Victoria Doobay, who is a psychologist, right? Psychologist, is that the right term? Okay.
Yeah.
I always want to say psychiatrist, but that's different, right? Yeah.
Those are the
Yeah.
medication ones.
That's the medication one, right? Psychologist and doctor of psychology here. So we're going to jump right back into the next half hour of this. And I wanted to ask you, Victoria, about, because you're a trailblazer, work that you're doing is, you're merging psychology and your spiritual knowing, your intuitive knowing, your awakening process, and doing yoga and your ancestry lineage. How is it that you see, or how you would like to see things progress in our world with merging those two concepts?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's such a good question. First off, I think it boils down to how we educate our graduate students who are going to school for psychology. And so
Hmm.
I've received a lot of that kind of feedback from the students that I work with, is that
Right.
they're all burnt out, and they all feel
Right.
like half the things they learn don't feel that meaningful to them. And so I think that a shift needs to happen in how we're educating, because we're taught so
Hmm.
many things in grad school that
Hmm.
are not necessarily correct. We're taught like what I was saying before, that the Western medical model is the perspective, and
Right. Right.
I think it has to start there. And I know a lot of the work that we do at the college I work at is a lot of trainings for our students and our staff on decolonizing mental health
Hmm.
processes and approaches. And that's something that I think needs to continue to happen. It's sort of this universal type of outreach to be like, yes,
Hmm.
there are other ways of doing this kind of work. And infusing
Hmm.
it at the college level, I think, can be really helpful, because it
Hmm.
challenges the idea that we're taught certain things in college or university. But like,
Right.
oh, here you are in a clinic that is part of a college and university, and you're learning that there are other ways to do it. So I think it's really
Right.
nice. It's a nice way of interrupting. And the other piece that I would love to see, and something that I'm hoping to start creating, is just the idea of more community care. So
Yes.
expanding again our ideas of wellness and
Hmm.
what wellness and connection mean to different communities, so different neighborhoods, or
Hmm.
different people living within the neighborhoods, and starting
Right.
from that point.
Right.
So having like a space that people can come to, and people from that neighborhood can do different types of wellness activities. And so it could be run by the people from specific neighborhoods, so that it is
Right.
specific for the people residing there, and
Yeah.
helpful for them.
I love that. I absolutely love that, because that takes away that whole separation consciousness, right? That brings it back to like what we did in ancient times when we had a tribe, right? Or even like when I was a kid growing up. I don't know. I can't even go to my neighbor and ask for an egg, or some sugar or something. Whereas, back in the day when we were kids, it was about community. We didn't have this internet or this separate, whatever this technology is separating the children as well, right? And that whole aspect of you talking about community and then educating at a certain level to start shifting, the mindset of these students who are, like you're saying, just totally burnt out of just constantly. And what is that, like studying all the time? What is that exactly? Is that, you
Yeah,
know
it's especially at the
just
grad level, it's
cramming it in?
research, it's
Right.
clinical work,
Oh god.
it's yeah, it's so frustrating to hear them talk about it, because it reminds me of my own grad school experience too.
Right.
And it's sad to watch them perish in it. They flounder so much. They're
Yeah.
tired all the time. They're
Yeah.
burnt out at certain times of the year more than others. And it's really tough to watch people with so much vitality, like late
Right.
20s, operate
Yeah.
like that.
Well, and I see that even in the education, like, and I'm a dropout. I went a year to university. I'm like, I can't do this. And
Mhm.
it's not, I've proved that quite wrong, that it's not because I don't have the smarts for it. It's just, there's something in our education system too that just, it hurts your head after a while. It takes the joy out of learning, because as a child you're curious about everything. You're like, I want to learn this, I want to discover this, I want to do that. And we've lost that childlike way. And so
Yeah.
as you're saying, like this trailblazing into like building community back differently, bringing that back, that you can gain trust in your people locally again, and even like introducing, like you're saying, different avenues for people to, like, you're doing yoga, right? Like you started doing yoga. I think that's amazing. I remember you telling me a story about somebody that came who had a child and they couldn't do yoga, like, unless they came to the park where you're doing it, and I love that,
I
because
love it too.
yeah, it touches people in such a deeper way. And I don't know, like, how do you see that happening? Because I have other ideas about community. I know it has to start with community as well, especially with the kids, um, and different programs for the kids and whatnot. But how do we start bringing? I know you're doing it with the yoga and whatnot, but what about kids that aren't in grad school, or kids that are struggling to find themselves, or even adults, whatnot? How do we? I know you're starting with the yoga aspect. Do you have any other ideas? Like, how else do we start moving this and building new communities? Like, I
Right.
wouldn't even know where to start. I know you're starting to look at it, so I don't know if you have any other ideas.
Right. It's daunting, exactly what you're
Yeah.
saying. And I think that that's part of what makes it difficult, is that it's so easy, in a sense, to have ideas and hard to ground them sometimes, or at
It
least that's what
is.
I struggle with. And
Mhm.
a lot of what I'm trying to do right now is just meet people and make different contacts in the community and see what other
Yeah.
people are doing, because there's so many people that are doing this kind of work, but in different ways. And I think that's incredibly helpful, because I've been thinking a lot about I keep using the term access points, but I think that people who are ready for this kind of work
Mhm.
can be accessed in different ways. And for me, that might be through
Right.
yoga. For my partner, it's through film and music, for instance.
Right.
And
Right.
and so it has me kind of thinking, well, we do need so many different types of people with
We
so
do.
many different types of skills and gifts to be doing this work, so that we
Mhm.
can reach as many people as we possibly can, including ourselves. And so you're right, yoga's just one way of doing it. And it has me again
Mhm.
thinking about what wellness is, what wellness can mean, and how that can look
Mhm.
different for everyone. And so, an example, I've been that same person actually that comes to our donation based yoga in the community. I actually had a tea with her earlier today. And
Oh,
yeah,
I love that synchronicity.
it's great. And she actually runs a not-for-profit for dance theater. And so it's pretty incredible. But some of the programming that she's been talking about is she has partnerships with schools, and
Right.
they go in and do different types of workshops for schools. And so we
Right.
were kind of talking about, and it helps me kind of think about what you're asking is, yes, we don't just start with grad students, but also what can we do at the first time children go to our school
Right.
institutions.
Yes.
And what are we thinking of as wellness? So are we talking about things like nutrition and sleep and consent and knowing your body, especially
Right.
for young people with uteruses, for
Yes,
instance?
especially.
Oh,
Yes.
and also, and that could incorporate things like yoga or somatic and nervous system release, because I
Mhm.
think that helps so much with regulation, or
Totally.
breathing and different other types of mindfulness meditation strategies, dance, movement, physical theater.
Right.
The list is
Right.
endless. And I think that's what I come back to, is that there's infinite possibility for connection and
Mm.
community, but just finding what is right for the particular school or community that you're working with. And
Right.
there's a school here actually that has an incredible gardening program. There's a huge garden
Oh,
attached to the
I love
elementary
that.
school. Yeah, and the kids are learning how to grow, and you can walk through the garden as being part of the community, but the kids are learning how to grow all sorts of veggies, and they take care of the garden. And there's an ecology program through that
Oh my God, I
elementary
love
school.
that.
So I think about things like that. I'm like, if I had learned that in school, that would have been a game changer. And I'm over here trying to grow a beet as best as I can.
Well, and then how do you see, what challenges do you see? Do you see any pushback from the mental health program? Like any, from that industry, from the medical field? Do you see any challenges that of creating these types of communities or kind of bridging the gap between the two? What kind of
Sure.
challenges do you see there?
Sure. I mean, I think our field's so intellectualized. And so I think it's tough because a lot of the field is research too. So I think we would
Right.
have to shift what we're researching,
Mm.
and that can be tough. You know, there are people that
Mm-hmm.
are doing different types of research studies on, mindfulness or yoga, but there are others that are not necessarily doing that. And so I think that
Right.
it's tough because we're going to have to shift that dialogue from the academic settings.
Right.
And that's tied up with our diagnosis system, the DSM
Mm-hmm.
model,
Mm-hmm.
or that big book that we use for
Right.
diagnosis. And that shifts right into pharmacology. So I think because
Right.
all these systems are so interconnected, it
They
will be
are. Yeah.
tough maybe to find stakeholders. I think there's a lot of
Mm-hmm.
people sort of underneath that, like 1% that is making
Mm-hmm.
money off this industry that are
Exactly.
doing a
Yeah.
lot of work to interrupt it. But I could see that being an obstacle. Another obstacle is funding. There's so many
Mm.
neighborhoods that don't have appropriate funding sources or
Right.
access to that funding.
Right.
And this neighborhood that I live in was able to get their ecology funded, but
Oh
a
wow. Yeah.
neighborhood that's more south from here might not be able to do something like that.
Right. Right.
And I think it's really tough. It comes back to just access of
Yeah.
money and
Yeah.
distribution of
And
wealth.
availability to other people. Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. And the whole aspect too is the research. When you bring up like the research, it reminds me of an article I read a couple of years ago about these scientists taking ayahuasca and researching it and trying to find the cause and effect. And this is where I get a little bit, you know, I don't want to say, I guess, angry. Yeah, I guess I do get a little angry about why are we researching it? Why do we research medicines or techniques or things that have been proven thousands of years before colonialism that it was a method that worked? Why do we need to have that proven to us in this society? Why, when we already know that it does? What is that about exactly? Why do we need to
Yeah, that's a
prove
good question
something?
too. I'm actually just looked over here because I'm reading a book called Inflamed right now,
Ooh,
by
what is that about?
it's incredible. It's by Rupa Marya and Raj Patel, and my supervisor actually gave it to me. And I know, pretty great. And it's all about how our bodies are inflamed because of colonialism.
Yes, I
And
agree.
it's incredible. It's broken down into different sections. And something that's really stood out, I'm partway through it, but something that's really stood out that I think can speak to what you're talking about
Mhm.
is the idea that where our science is grounded, and you know
Mm,
the things that we choose to research are grounded in certain kinds of theory, which support the Western medical model
right.
essentially. And
Yep,
so I think a lot of what tends to happen is when colonialism happened and cultures got dismissed and wiped out, is we lost that connection
we did.
to
Yeah.
the healing practices that have worked, and a different
Hmm.
model got imposed, a model that
Right.
is based off of a lot of intellectualization, which has
Hmm.
its place. I
It
I think
does.
research absolutely
Yep.
has its place and
Yep.
can be helpful, and can be an access point for some too. If someone
Yeah.
can think cerebrally about something, that might be helpful for them. But
Yeah.
I think that there's a lot that's lost because we lose the context in which research has taken place. So, for example, the
Hmm.
father of gynecology experimenting on Black women, or on Black
Right.
enslaved women, right? And
Right.
so,
Right.
is that research? Right.
Right.
And that's where
Well,
our gynecology practices have come from, for instance,
yeah. Well,
and
same with
that's just one
birthing
example. Pardon?
with Queen Elizabeth. Queen Elizabeth. It was a Queen Elizabeth, Queen Victoria. I'm not right on that, but it was the older one, the one before the grandmother of who's alive now, Queen
I
Elizabeth,
don't know my
whatever.
royals very well.
I don't know my royals either, but in Ina May Gaskin's Child Guide to Childbirth, talks about that women never birthed on their back
Hmm.
until that queen's husband wanted to have a good view of the baby coming out and made her birth on her back. So all of these things, like there's so many things that we do that aren't necessarily,
Right.
you know,
Agreed.
correct. And yeah. So I wanted to bring that up too, because when you were talking
Yeah.
about that, it reminded me of how we birth as well. And most women don't even know. They're quick for a C-section, they're quick for the epidural, and they have no idea how their bodies are
Mhm.
working either. So
Ugh,
that was
that's
another
a whole other thing. I have
other
so many opinions about that, but
so do I,
I
yeah.
think that's part of the issue is like when we think about who has privilege in North American society, and then we see that
Hmm.
those are the decision makers, primarily
Right,
straight white men who are older.
right,
And it's been that way since the so-called founding fathers of the USA and
right,
Canada.
right,
And that's, why is there a father of gynecology? This person does not have a
right.
uterus. So, it has me kind of thinking about things like that. And because I think so many cultures got plowed down,
Hmm.
our science is based off a lot of what white, straight, older men have wanted to study.
Hmm.
And we've been sort of conditioned to fit into that framework. So I think we need to
Yeah,
change what we're researching. I think science is very valuable, but what are we
yeah,
researching? How are we
exactly,
doing it? And who's
exactly,
guiding that?
exactly. And the results too, like, are they being shared equally with everybody? Are the findings really
Mhm.
showing, the base of the research too, are
Mhm.
you, I know some, pharmaceutical and things like that, they try to prove the medicine is doing one thing, but it may actually do something entirely
Mhm.
different. So the focus of the research as well, right? And avoiding all other attributes that could play into that, could change that
Right.
result. So all of that and the research and so the challenges, where do you think there would be a biggest hit back with psychology? Would it be, with plant medicines like ayahuasca and things like that, or do you think it would be when it hits the pharmaceutical, I should say, aspect of psychology? Where do you kind of, just in your own expertise, feel like there may be a massive pushback? Because yoga's nice, right? Yoga's good now,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Dancing is
Mindfulness
great.
and yoga.
That's all great, but what if we get what about the psychedelic realm? What about plant medicines? What about going
Yeah.
to the rainforest and fasting for 4 days and dancing to the moon? Like, what about things that seem a little crazy, that
Sure.
don't fit?
Sure. So it's really interesting that you bring that up, but there's a lot of different clinical trials happening in psychology right now
Oh.
about psychedelics,
Hmm.
and it's fascinating to me. So ketamine is probably one of the first ones that
What is
uh,
that? I don't know that.
I don't know. I'm not very familiar with ketamine in the same way as psilocybin,
Okay.
but
Okay.
ketamine, I
Oh,
would probably have
ketamine.
to.
I think I do know ketamine. I think I do know a little bit about ketamine. Sorry, go ahead. Yeah.
No, no
Yeah.
worries. But
Yeah.
ketamine and psilocybin are sort of on the forefront
Hmm.
of these randomized clinical trials, and so where
Interesting.
people are sort of given smaller doses of these typically thought of as drugs, and
Right.
yeah, and monitored by a psychologist or a mental health professional, but guided through the experience by somebody. And so that's fascinating. So there's been a lot of sort of psychedelic therapy that has
You need to
been
research me.
right. You should come do one of the clinical trials, but
With
so
all
they're
the
not
research. Go ahead.
necessarily
Sorry.
released on the market as of yet, but there are
Okay.
so many different types of clinical trials that are looking at microdosing of psilocybin,
Okay.
for instance, and how that might actually be helpful for people to gain insight and awareness,
Okay.
and tackle things like grief and depression and loss and transcendence. And there's a book actually
Right.
by Michael Pollan called How to Change Your Mind that talks a lot about all of this. And
Oh.
yeah, it's really cool. And I'm so inspired by it because I think part of the field is shifting in that way. That is allowing people to be like, yeah, I could microdose with psilocybin, for instance, and have
Right.
maybe, or, maybe be in the safe guided space with my therapist who I trust
Right.
and who can guide me
Right.
through this larger dosage of psilocybin. And
Right.
so there's a lot of research about that now. You cannot go to a therapist for it yet, but
Right.
it's something that's developing and that I'm definitely excited about. And I'm
That is
not quite
exciting.
sure what the impact that will have on psychopharmacology as of yet. But given just, right now in the clinical trials, they're trying to show that psilocybin, for instance, helps with depression and all, grief, transcendence, things that I was talking about before. I imagine that would
Right.
have a large impact on psychopharmacology and, the antidepressants that were typically prescribed.
Right. And how about the rituals that go along though with the medicines? How do we keep those intact, right? Like for
Right.
instance, I mean, psilocybin and doing the research and doing the medicine and doing all of that is great, but what if it comes down to the ancient shamans who have been passed down traditions of how to run, I know you did a temescal for the first time, right, when you were in Mexico, right?
Mhm.
How do you, if that was to become westernized, right? For instance, a temescal, um, I don't know how they would do that, or even like an ayahuasca ceremony. I don't even know what they would do, but the medicine that comes from that, how do you how do you keep all of those ancient traditions intact so we don't lose that again? Because
Right.
that's what's happened already. We've lost so much. We can't lose what we've already
Yeah.
started to regain,
No,
you
you're
know?
absolutely right about that. And I think that's the struggle of bridging sort of
Yeah,
these Western models with other types of models
it
is
is.
that,
Yeah.
that's what happened to yoga and mindfulness. Both of
Right.
those things got completely co opted and appropriated. And,
Yeah.
some people will mention, like, oh, this is from this tradition or this tradition. But
Right.
a lot of, and sometimes, and that's also problematic in a sense too. Just to mention it and not really explain it is problematic. So I
Yeah.
agree with you, and I actually don't know how much these randomized clinical trials are incorporating the traditions, and I think that's an
Mhm.
excellent question. There's not a ton of information about it again, and you're right.
Yeah.
I think the fear is that we would take something that is ancient and works like yoga or mindfulness or, working with psilocybin, for instance,
Right.
and map it onto the existing Western models. So
Right.
that would still be an appropriation
Right.
of these practices
Right.
if we're not
Mhm.
doing them responsibly or explaining the history to someone that you work with or
Right.
maybe involving ritual.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm glad that you're in the field, honestly, because you're amazing at what you do, and I love how you're so open to, the mysticism and the intuition and all of that. So we need more, change makers like that in the world, honestly, because with these challenges that come up with how we're dealing with mental health and even just overall wellness, that's changing. That's changing in a really big way. But then we don't want to lose our roots of what we've already lost as well. So I think it's amazing in what you're doing and how you're button up against those challenges and working through them and making those connections. I think it's a very beautiful honored path that you're doing. And yeah, I I just wanted to thank you for being on our show. That's all the time that we have today. It went so fast. You're gonna have to come back.
I would
Um,
love to come back. Thank you for having me. I always love talking to you.
so do I. And is there anything that you wanted to add? I mean, tell people how they can reach you. I'm gonna put all that information anyways, also. But if you want to just let people how to know how to reach you or any closing thoughts, go for it.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to thank everyone for their openness to these kinds of conversations and for listening. And if you're curious about reaching out to me or want to talk more about decolonizing mental health, I know that Rena will provide my email and contact information. So please don't hesitate
Right
to.
there.
Woo!
Awesome. Thank you, Victoria. It's been amazing. So much love. I know we'll catch up soon, but yeah, thank you for being on the Great Break podcast, and stay tuned, guys. We will be back again in a couple of weeks with the next episode. Take care.